Before we jump in, a quick disclaimer. The content you are about to hear is AI generated, based on authoritative sources, including ISO standards documents, conference papers like PCLNO 63 and P2300, and technical reports from the C++ committee. Okay, let's get into it. If you look at the history of C++ wit, there are really only a few moments that just shifted the tectonic plates of the language.
Yeah, a few key inflection points.
Right. You've got templates back in 1998, move semantics in C++ 11, and then you have C++ 20 coroutines. But let's be honest, if you've ever tried to actually use coroutines in C++ 20, you probably noticed something strange.
It doesn't feel like a finished feature. Not at all.
No, it felt less like getting a new power tool and more like, opening an IKEA box.
Right.
You dump out 1,000 screws, and then you realize there's no Allen key included. You just stare at it and think, okay, now what?
That is the perfect analogy. It's the IKEA effect, but without the instruction manual. You get the keywords, co-weigh, co-yield, co-return, but then you look for the types. You look for an std.task or a replacement for std.future or an event loop, and they just aren't there.
It's what the sources call an assembly-required design.
It is.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. Why? Why did the committee ship a kit instead of a library? Because looking at the research, this wasn't an accident. It wasn't laziness.
No, it was the result of a massive philosophical war that stretched over a decade. It was a war of constraints.
A war of constraints.
Yeah, to understand why C++ 20 looks the way it does, you have to go back to the early 2010s. The hardware landscape was shifting under our feet in a way that, frankly, terrified systems engineers. Moore's law, specifically frequency scaling, had effectively stopped.
The free lunch was over.
It was over. You couldn't just wait 18 months for a faster CPU to fix your sloppy code anymore.
And at the exact same time, internet services were just exploding. We were staring down what they called the C10K problem.
10,000 concurrent connections on a single server.
Which sounds kind of small now. But at the time, it was a brick wall.
It was. The traditional Model 1 OS thread per connection just collapsed completely. If you spawn a standard thread, you're paying, about a megabyte for the stack?
A megabyte, yeah.
So do the math. 10,000 threads times 1 megabyte.
That's 10 gigabytes of RAM just for empty stacks. You haven't processed a single packet yet, and you're already out of memory.
So the industry scrambled. We all moved to non-blocking I/O. We started using ePOL on Linux, Q on BSD.
And that solved the scalability problem.
It did, but it created a software engineering nightmare. We entered the era of callback hell.
Oh, I remember this. To make code non-blocking, you had to slice your logical functions into these little pieces, these callbacks, scattered all over your code base.
It destroyed readability. You lost your loops, you lost RAII, you lost your stack traces.
Right. If your program crashed in a callback, good luck figuring out how you even got there.
It was spaghetti code 2.0.
Now, C++ 11 tried to help with std.future, didn't it? But the sources suggest that was a dead end for high performance.
std.future was a first attempt, but it was insufficient for serious systems work. The get method was blocking, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of async I/O.
Right.
But the bigger sin was allocation. std.future almost always required a heap allocation for its shared state. It violated that core zero overhead principle.
Which brings us to the Holy Grail. The committee wanted something that looked like synchronous code, easy to read, top to bottom, but compiled down to something incredibly efficient.
They were aiming for what they called negative overhead.
Wait, negative overhead? That sounds like marketing fluff. I mean, how can you have less than zero overhead?
It's a provocative term, I know, but the logic holds up. The idea is that the abstraction should let the compiler see through the code and optimize it better than a human could writing a state machine by hand.
Okay, I see.
A human managing a complex state machine. They make mistakes, they use too much memory, they miss optimization opportunities. The compiler, it doesn't get tired.
So that's the dream. But getting there sparked what the notes call the Great Schism. This is Era 1, roughly 2013 to 2018. And it wasn't just a debate, it was a philosophical split.
It was. This was the battle between two models, Stackful versus Stackless.
Let's break these down because this distinction, it defines everything that came later. So in the red corner, we have the Stackful model, often called fibers.
Right, championed by people like Oliver Kawaki and Nat Goodspeed. Think of a fiber as a very lightweight thread. It has its own side stack, maybe just 4 KB. You can switch between them really, really fast.
This is basically how Go implements coroutines.
Pretty much, yeah. And the appeal is obvious. It's non-viral. I can call a fiber from anywhere, suspend it, and the caller doesn't even need to know I suspended. It's transparent.
So why didn't we just do that? It sounds so much simpler.
Two big reasons: memory and optimization. Even 4 KB per connection is too much when you want to handle, say, 1 million connections.
That's still gigabytes of RAM.
Exactly. But maybe more importantly, to the compiler, a fiber switch is an opaque jump. It's a black box.
The compiler can't see what's happening.
Right. It can't see inside the fiber switch to inline code or optimize away allocations. It just acts as this big optimization barrier.
Okay, so in the blue corner, we have the Stackless model. This was pushed heavily by Microsoft, led by Gornishinov.
And in the Stackless model, there is no side stack. The compiler effectively takes your function and slices it into a state machine. Any local variables that need to survive a suspension point get spilled into a dedicated storage area called the coroutine frame.
And the memory difference there?
Oh, it's massive.
Yeah.
Coroutine frame might be as small as 48 bytes. We were talking bytes versus kilobytes.
Oh, wow.
For the C++ committee, which, prioritizes raw performance and hardware control above almost everything else, that efficiency was incredibly seductive.
But there's a catch, a big one. It's viral.
The colored function problem. If I want to co-await something, my function has to be a coroutine. And its caller has to co-await me and so on all the way up the chain.
You have to change the signature of everything.
All the way up. That's painful for legacy code bases. You can't just drop it in. But the Stackless proponents argued that because the compiler generates the state machine, it has full visibility. It can theoretically optimize everything.
Great.
And that argument, well, it largely won the day until we hit the turning point.
Jacksonville, 2018. The sources describe this meeting as tense.
Tense is putting it mildly. There was a binary choice. The committee had to decide. Do we ship the Microsoft-based technical specification in C++20, or do we listen to this very strong, very technical objection coming from Google?
This was the core Coroutines proposal, P163. What was Google's beef?
I mean, they use C++ more than almost anyone. Why did they hate the Microsoft design so much?
It came down to hidden costs, specifically memory allocation.
The Microsoft design implicitly allocates that coroutine frame on the heap using operator new.
But wait, didn't you just say the compiler can optimize everything? The Microsoft team claimed a sufficiently smart compiler could remove that allocation.
That optimization is called Halo Heap Allocation Elision. And Google, well, they didn't buy it.
They didn't trust the magic.
They argued Halo was too fragile. They said relying on compiler magic to satisfy the zero overhead principle was just too dangerous. If the optimization failed, maybe because the coroutine escaped a scope or you called it across a translation unit, you silently got a heap allocation.
And in a latency-sensitive environment or an embedded system, a silent malloc is a disaster.
Exactly. Google wanted explicit control. They wanted the coroutine frame to be a user-defined object. They wanted to be able to say, put this frame on the stack, or put this frame in this pre-allocated buffer.
They want it to be a low-level primitive, not a high-level abstraction with hidden behaviors.
That's it. What happened? The committee voted for pragmatism. Remember the context. Rust and Go were eating into the system's programming market.
Right.
The committee felt they couldn't wait another 3 to 6 years for C plus 23 or 26 to get a perfect model. They needed to ship something to stop the bleeding.
So Stackless won. The Microsoft model became the C++20 standard, but Google's warning about fragile optimizations that didn't just disappear.
No, in fact, it foreshadowed almost all the problems we see today.
Yeah.
But before we get to the pain, we should talk about what actually shipped. Because despite the flaws, the engineering is pretty impressive.
Right, let's look at the mechanics. First off, the keywords. Originally, it was just a wait, right?
Yeah, until they realized millions of lines of C++ code already used a wait as a variable name.
Oops.
So it got the co-wait, co-return. It's ugly, I know, but it serves a purpose. It's like a visual flare gun saying, hey, control flow changes here.
Now, there's one specific mechanism in the notes that seems critical: symmetric transfer. It sounds like a sci-fi teleportation device.
It's arguably the most critical mechanical addition. It solves the stack overflow problem in async loops.
Walk me through that. Why would an async loop overflow the stack?
Okay, so imagine a server loop that accepts a connection, handles it, and then waits for the next one. If co-await just called the next coroutine's resume function like a normal function call,
you'd be adding a stack frame every single time, one on top of another.
It's recursion, even if it doesn't look like it. And eventually, boom, stack overflow.
Right.
Symmetric transfer changes the game. Instead of calling the next coroutine, the current coroutine suspends and returns a handle a ticket to the next coroutine. The runtime takes that ticket and performs a tail call. It jumps directly to the new coroutine without growing the stack. It turns recursion into a flat loop.
which allows for infinite event loops without using any stack space.
Exactly. Without this, you couldn't write a high-performance web server with C++ +20 coroutines, period.
So we have the mechanism. We have the efficient state machine. But we're back to my original complaint. The assembly-required philosophy. Why are there no standard types? Why do I have to write a whole promise type just to say, hello world?
This was the compromise. The committee realized that different domains have mutually exclusive requirements. A coroutine on a GPU has very different needs from one handling network packets or one driving a UI.
Give me an example of how they differ.
Okay, take thread safety. If you're writing a single-threaded networking loop, adding a mutex or an atomic counter to every coroutine is just wasted overhead. It slows you down.
But for a GUI app?
For a GUI app where a background task needs to update the main thread, you absolutely need that synchronization. So if they picked one standard std.task, it would be wrong for half the users.
They feared baking a suboptimal design into the standard library forever.
Precisely. So they gave us the kit to build our own.
But the consequence is that now we have a Tower of Babel.
We do. You have folly.coro, Hask from Meta. You have CPP Coro. You have boost.asio. And here's the problem. They don't play nice together.
They're not interoperable.
Not easily. You can't just co-weigh a folly task inside a boost ASIO coroutine without writing these messy adapter layers. It slowed down adoption significantly. People just looked at it and said, too hard.
And what about Google's fear about Halo failing? Did that turn out to be true?
Oh, it turned out to be 100% true. In practice, heap allocation illusion is incredibly fragile. If you pass a coroutine handle to another function that the compiler can't see inside, like across a translation unit boundary, the compiler panics.
It can't prove the lifetime is safe.
It can't. So it just forces a heap allocation to be safe.
I was reading about Google's internal library, K3, from that C++ Now 2024 talk by Aaron Jacobs. It sounds like they had to put extreme guardrails in place to make this usable.
They did. Google basically said, we cannot rely on this compiler magic. They had to enforce strict rules, like only allowing symmetric transfer and preventing coroutine handles from escaping their immediate scope. They're effectively treating the standard coroutines as the dangerous primitives P10063 warned they were.
And for embedded systems, it must be even harder.
It is. Many embedded environments forbid malloc entirely. So the implicit call to operator new in C++ 20 coroutines was a showstopper.
So you just can't use them?
Well, you can, but you have to cheat. Embedded developers have to override operator new in their promise types to point to static buffers. They are essentially implementing manually what Google wanted the language to do automatically in the first place.
So we have this powerful but difficult feature. Where does that leave us today? Is it worth the pain?
The data says yes. Meta, for instance, migrated their video calling infrastructure from chained futures to coroutines. They saw significant improvements.
Right.
Yeah, the code is cleaner, but also faster. Because the compiler manages the state better than a chain of Lambda callbacks, you get better cache locality, better register usage.
So for the power users, the people who can afford to write their own runtime, the assembly required model paid off.
It did. And the rest of us are finally catching up. C++ 23 gave us ftd.generator.
The first vocabulary type.
Yes. And it's significant because it's synchronous. It's for lazy sequences generating numbers, traversing trees. It proved coroutines aren't just for async I/O.
But the really big shift, the roof on the house that's coming in C++ 26, right? With std.execution.
This is the big one. Proposal P2300. This brings senders and receivers to the standard.
Explain that to me like I'm 5. Or maybe like I'm a junior dev.
Okay, think of C++ 20 coroutines as the engine. It spins, it works, but you have to build a car around it. P2300 gives us the transmission and the chassis. It defines a unified model where anything that can be awaited is a sender.
And how does that solve the allocation problem we talked about, the Google complaint?
The sender-receiver model is designed to be lazily constructed. You build up the entire operation chain, do this, then this, then this, before you actually start it. Because the whole chain is visible to the compiler before execution, the runtime can often flatten the state.
So it can remove the need for dynamic allocation?
Often, yes. It fulfills the original promise of P10063 structured zero allocation concurrency, but it builds on top of the C++ 20 mechanics instead of replacing them.
It feels like we're finally finishing the house we started building back in 2018.
That's a great way to put it. We built the foundation in C++ 20, raw, powerful, slightly dangerous. Now in C++ 26, with std.execution, we're putting on the roof and the drywall.
So if we synthesize all this, The evolution of C++ coroutines wasn't just adding a feature, it was a decade-long tension between abstraction and control.
Absolutely. And there's a key lesson here about the zero overhead myth. We learned you cannot blindly rely on sufficiently smart compilers to optimize away semantics like allocation. If the language spec implies an allocation, you have to assume it will happen.
Unless you have explicit architectural guarantees.
Right. The assembly-required approach was painful, and maybe it alienated some users, but it preserved the ability for experts to build things like Folly or K3.
It seems like if the committee had shipped a heavy, garbage-collected std.task in 2020, C++ might have lost the high-performance concurrency race entirely.
I think so. They sacrificed ease of use for foundational power.
Here's a provocative thought to leave you with. We know the committee rejected Google's core coroutines to avoid delay. But imagine if they hadn't. Imagine we waited until C++ 23 or 26 for a fully explicit allocation-free model. Would we have a cleaner language today? Or would C++ have simply lost its relevance in the cloud infrastructure world to Rust and Go during that 5-year gap?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. And frankly, looking at the adoption curves of Rust, I think the committee made the only choice they could.
A fascinating what if. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into C++ coroutines. We'll catch you on the next one.